politics and religion. So this is going to bring us up to the election of 1824. So we're going to get back into politics here. Just a quick note. Yes, and you notice that there isn't a picture here yet because I don't want to spoil what's going to happen. So try not to zoom ahead in the video yet. Monroe is going to be a two-term president. So this means Washington serves as 2 terms as president, Adams as 1, Jefferson as 2, Madison as 2, and Monroe as 2. Fun fact, this is the only time in American history that you get 3 presidents in a row that all serve 2 terms that are all from the same party. We've had presidents serve 2 terms in a row, 3 presidents in a row like that actually in modern history, but we flip-flop back and forth between, in modern history, Democrats and Republicans. Anyway, so the thing is, this is leading up to the election of 1824, and in this election, the Republican Party is going to split into factions for this election. There's actually going to be 5 candidates that are all competing for the Republican Party nomination. Although actually of these 5, the first is going to drop out. John C. Calhoun drops out and goes for the vice president place instead, hoping that he can become the president in 1828. So really we're going to look at 4 specific individuals. So it's going to be William Crawford, John Quincy Adams, Henry Clay, and Andrew Jackson. So some of these names you may have heard before, and some of them are a little bit new. Now, all of these candidates are going to have a strong regional following. I am going to ask you in a second who you would vote for based off of very, very small amounts of information, which, let's face it, some people still vote on today. So, the first candidate, William Crawford. He is going to actually be the official party nominee. So if you're one of those people that always votes with party lines, he's your man. Now, technically, none of the candidates are going to run with a platform, but Crawford is going to very much identify with states' rights. Now, Clay and Adams are both going to run on more of the idea of a centralized government. Now, we've seen John Quincy Adams before, and he's got some of that name recognition with his father having been a previous president, so think if that would be who your candidate would be. Whereas Henry Clay is going to run on particularly the American system. This was basically a program within the government that would have promoted American economic growth. It would have been about like protecting domestic manufacturers from foreign competition. So it would have been ideas like high tariffs, not just to make revenue for the government, but really to protect manufacturers. And then the 4th candidate was Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson, hopefully you remember who he is. He really has no political stance on any issues, and in a way, this is his greatest asset. He is a military hero, fresh from the people, unsullied by any kind of connection with Washington politicians who a lot of times the public associated with hard times and sectional controversies. So take a second and decide who would you vote for, and make note of it because this is part of your journal. So let's see if you voted for who the American people voted for. So the thing is, if you look on this map, you can see that actually Andrew Jackson got the largest amount of electoral votes. However, no one has a majority of the Electoral College, and you need to have a majority of the Electoral College in order to actually win this election, win a presidential election. So it ends up being thrown to the House of Representatives. So you can see here that John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson, they're the ones that have the most votes. They have the largest amount of Electoral College. But what happens once it's thrown to the House of Representatives is it's basically one state, one vote. Now Clay, as you can see here, has the fewest number of votes, and so he's eliminated. So no longer can anyone vote for Clay. And then Crawford actually had suffered a debilitating stroke, and so he was basically no longer a viable candidate. So it's really between Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson. Clay is going to use his political influence, though, to line up support for Quincy Adams. And so in the end, John Quincy Adams becomes the next president of the United States. And he in turn would put Clay in as his Secretary of State. However, you can imagine Jackson and his followers were outraged by this because they feel like he lost unfairly. After all, he did get the largest percentage of the popular vote and electoral vote. He just didn't get a majority of either. And so they're going to start building their own party, which is going to become the Jacksonian Democrats. However, before we get into the Jacksonian Democrats, we have to kind of look at just democracy at this time period. We're going to see that in this time, individual states, not the federal government, decides who votes. And we're going to see actually 6 states, Indiana, Mississippi, Illinois, Alabama, Missouri, and Maine, all enter the Union between 1816 and 1821. None of them are going to require one owns property in order to vote. And remember, that was like the big thing that we've been talking about up until this point. You always had to own property to vote. And so they get rid of that qualification. And in fact, by the end of the 1820s, universal white male suffrage basically has become the norm everywhere in the United States, except for a few states like Rhode Island, Louisiana, and Virginia. And so this is actually a general trend of democratization, at least within the United States political structures. You're seeing this reduction or outright removal of property qualifications for voting, but also for like office holding. Representation also became a lot more equal because a lot of states will give more seats to newer, rapidly growing regions. Plus, new states are being formed, and then they're getting, their own seats within like the House of Representatives and the Senate and everything as well. The selection of local officials, for instance, like judges, a lot of times are going to be taken out of the hands of the governors and the executive councils and instead given to the voters. Today, if you go vote, please go vote, by the way, this is your PSA, please go vote in every election, local elections as well. I've seen literally local elections in my time be won by as few as like 60 votes and stuff. So please go vote. But anyway, sorry. If you go vote, you'll see like a lot of times like you'll vote directly for a judge instead of like the judge being decided by the governor and such like that. Written ballots also are going to become normal by the 1820s. Part of the reason for this is because of economic changes had made new classes within American society. So a lot of workers, clerks, small tradesmen, their livelihood wasn't necessarily related to the land, and so they didn't necessarily own property, but they still want the vote so they can protect their own interests. Now, as much as it seems like we're seeing a more democratic structure, there is some issues at this time. Political opportunities are really going to shrink for both free Black people as well as women in America. Because in the early 1800s, basically race and gender are replacing wealth and status as a basis for defining political participation in the United States. In fact, if you look at it, 10 states are going to join between 1821 and 1861. So that's the time period all the way leading up to the Civil War. None of them will allow Black people to vote at all. Now, African Americans are going to protest this because, this means foreigners and aliens can have the right and privileges of an American citizen within, a few years, but yet native-born African Americans couldn't. In fact, by the 1850s, Black people really could only vote in certain New England states. Now, the argument behind all of this at this time was basically a lot of people believed and argued that only white males had the intelligence and the love of liberty, and therefore only white males could actually be entrusted with political rights. And so what this really means more than anything else is that political rights are being based off of sex and race, making them, natural rights and hence immutable rights more than anything else. This is not part of your journal, but I want you to think about it for a second. What is good about this? What is bad about this? How are you seeing this could potentially lead up to, the Civil War and everything? We're also going to see another popular religious revolt during this time period, the Second Great Awakening. Americans were basically demanding a greater voice, not just in politics, but also in religion at this time. So the Second Great Awakening is really led more than anything else by Methodists and Baptists. And a lot of their success was because they were able to reshape religion basically to fit the needs and values of ordinary Americans. A lot of the religious experience became more about like a personal, heartfelt experience that might produce a spiritual rebirth. I'm not going into all the details about this. I definitely recommend you reading about it in your book. But I do want to mention for women and Black Americans, they're going to find this evangelicalism pretty appealing. And part of it's because it gives them some sort of power over their own lives. And I have to explain this. For women, they might be given independent action and organizations, I should say, within their own church institutions. And the thing is, the denominations were still formally controlled by men, so it was acceptable for, women to have a women's guild that they had power over within the church, because the church itself was still dominated by men. For Black Americans, they're also going to feel empowered. You see a lot of slaves converting at this time, and they felt like, this religion meant that they should be free and equal. And a lot of times they're going to fuse their own culture with Christianity. So they're kind of meshing together Christianity with a lot of folk beliefs from their African heritage. But still, women and Black Americans were limited in this evangelicalism because they were denied official positions of authority in at least white-dominated churches. We do see, though, free Black Northerners might found their own independent churches. Now, in the South, though, we're going to see an increasing number of planters might embrace this evangelicalism, but evangelicals had to be very careful when it came to their views on slavery. Now, at first, basically, they're going to mute some of their attacks on slavery, and then actually evangelicals would develop a full-blown religious defense of the institution of slavery, and they would base it around like biblical sanctioning of human bondage. So when we're looking at like religion and politics in Jacksonian America, and Jacksonian America kind of starts with that whole election of 1824 and everything, white men are the ones that are retaining the power in America at this time.